This one's gonna make you think, what if someone just stopped paying their taxes? You don't need to take the risk to find out, because I'll tell you a curious case of a man who did exactly that, but while I think this person's argument against state property tax has some holes, it's really interesting food for thought that I want to explore about what this particular case tells us about taxation as a whole. Obviously, this is not financial advice, but subscribe to the channel for more interesting discussions like this, and let's dive into it.
I have a legal and a lawful right to it.
I met with David Darby on the 4.7 acres of land that he has owned for 35 years. Property he tells me he acquired a land patent for. Property that was also sold by the county for just over $63,000 in an online auction this morning.
He was paying the taxes up to that point in time. Then he stopped.
The county treasurer says Darby's land is one of 52 properties in foreclosure right now. We dug up this record showing he hasn't paid taxes on it since 2009.
Why did you stop paying taxes in 2009?
Because they would not recognize the 1878 Constitution. And it's all longhand. They didn't have copiers then.
Darby showed me Washington's 1878 state constitution, one that prohibits the taxation of patented land. Trouble is, the state operates under a different constitution, validated 11 years later, one Darby calls illegal.
This land has just, according to the county, been sold to someone else.
Yes, it has.
And they're going to have to come in here and remove you, according to the county.
Well, they have to come in and show a higher form of title than a land patent.
He says the land is still his because he has a land patent. What happens?
That is something that he will have to argue with the new owner.
The county says its work is done. They'll have their back taxes when whoever won this bidding war pays up. But Darby says it's not over.
The buyer, I feel sorry for the buyer.
If you don't know, patented land is simply a property and makes its way from public ownership to private ownership. But that doesn't make it tax exempt, at least not according to Washington State Constitution of 1889. However, the Constitution that David Darby claims to follow was drafted a whole 11 years before that, in 1878, and was never even approved as state law. That likely makes him the only person to claim it to follow a completely different constitution, but maybe you're wondering, where does the claim that patented land is exempt from property tax come from? Well, Washington's state constitution drafts before 1889 did have articles that gave temporary tax breaks to land that was sold at auctions, and the purpose of it was to incentivize people to move in and populate the area after Washington officially became a U.S. state. And that's why when the matter went to the higher courts, David Darby's case against the foreclosure of his property was finally struck down. The Court of Appeals finally ruled, saying before there are no set of facts in the complaint that could justify sealing the case, there's no relief the Superior Court could provide. The Superior Court's dismissal under Civil Rule 12b-6 was proper. We affirm the trial court's dismissal of Darby's complaint, and that's completely in line with the state constitution in Washington that's actually in force, which is the 1889 version. 14th Amendment for it reads clearly on the issue of taxation, quote, "The power of taxation shall never be suspended, surrendered, or contracted away. All taxes shall be uniform upon the same class of property within the territorial limits of the authority levying the tax, and shall be levied and collected for public purpose only." Another important reason to note that finally ended David Darby's claim ties was into such an interesting subject, which is a group of people on the far right of the political spectrum that call themselves sovereign citizens, whom U.S. law should not even apply. Digging into David Darby's past records, I found that he also used to be a member of the so-called Patriot Movement back in the 90s. It's a group that partly explains David's insistence that he's born a free man, nestled in the extreme anti-government movement. The court opinion document I just read from, which explains the decision, was the final nail in the coffin for David Darby's efforts at getting back his property, which had then been occupied by the new owner. But interestingly enough, this wasn't the first nor the last case the courts in Washington have had to deal with, especially concerning self-proclaimed sovereign citizens whose claims are nestled in the idea that they never signed up to be a citizen and obey the law. Here's how Judge John Stein shut down that argument.
Sir, I don't want to hear any of your constitutionalist crap. I mean, just save it for somebody else who's stupid and believes in that. You're here on charges of second-degree kidnapping. I found probable cause for that offense. Anybody who's familiar with the court system at all can tell all this paperwork he gave to these people is total nonsense. However, if you're not familiar with court paperwork, and I realize this was a Russian family, they may not know much about the United States, and somebody who claims to be a lawyer handing them what they're claiming is legal documents, threatening them with being deported and property confiscation and all kinds of other malarkey may take it seriously.
And this doesn't just appear in the area of taxation, but also with some drivers who are pulled over by the cops and then claim their freedom to move as a natural-born free human on Earth. Clearly, this argument goes nowhere to begin with. The foundation of our political systems are based on Thomas Hobbes' social contract theory, where individuals born in a nation give up a part of their absolute freedom to gain the security and cooperation of their entire country. That's what results in the tax system, the common defense, welfare state, and business. And interestingly enough, if someone truly wants to stop participating in this contract and stop being a citizen, countries usually allow that option too. US law allows someone to voluntarily renounce and revoke their citizenship status if they so choose, which obviously deprives them of all the rights and privileges that come with it. Yet it's interesting that you'll only see these things out of context of crimes where the individual finds an attempt to take a case for themselves when it doesn't exist. Here's an example of that exactly.
The judge accepted a not guilty plea and allowed him to be released from jail after Hicks said he'd reluctantly show up to the court hearings. Last week in a jailhouse interview, Hicks told KXLY4 he shouldn't have been pulled over that day and didn't cooperate with deputies because he doesn't believe in their jurisdiction to arrest him.
I am sovereign. I have sovereign rights, unalienable rights that I was born with here in America.
The problem for him now is to continue his lifestyle at home. He'll have to show up to a court he doesn't believe in.
But as I stated before, I'm under common law.
All in all, I think cases like the one we saw with David Darby are a great tangent to speak about citizen rights and duties from the perspective of political philosophy. And while it may get people like David nowhere, it's certainly a revelation to see the many kinds of fringes that lie on the political spectrum. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this, because I really like the thought exercise with cases like this that we can't have in any other context.